Hello everyone, Karnasa here, and welcome back to Kerbal Gets Real, the next millennia. In the last episode, I left things on a little bit of a cliffhanger by unfortunately stranding 4 astronauts on the surface of the moon. Hernan Cortez, Boris Bogvardzy, Evan David, and Phineas Masters were stuck when their lander came crashing down a little bit too hard. So, rather than send a dedicated rescue mission, I had a look at all of the different pieces that I had on the surface of the moon already, and I came across this, the lunar gantry, the lunar crane that I sent down in the last episode as well, and I thought, you know what, this thing is highly maneuverable. Maybe, just maybe, if I get the right kind of angle, I might be able to just flip this thing the right way and right itself so that we can take off yet again. This was easier said than done, considering I was doing all of this at about 4 frames per second. And yeah, this was the closest I got with the full lander, and that just, well, it incredibly infuriated me, and I thought, it's probably better if I just decouple the ascent stage. That ascent stage has a very wide, flat base. Might be a little bit easier to flip it up the way that I want to with the lunar crane. And you know what? It was much easier. In fact, I managed to write this without meaning to. So what I'm about to do here is I'm about to turn to try and get into a good position, and somehow turning this was all that I needed to do to flip it up, like so. Now that that's done, now that we are pointed the right way up, we have everything in that ascent stage that is going to be able to send these 4 astronauts back into a low lunar orbit, hopefully to rendezvous with their orbiter. So when we came crashing down, the only thing we lost on top of the lander was the docking port. We didn't lose any fuel, we didn't lose any RCS pods, nothing like that, so this thing is pretty much ready to just go. So what we're going to do is grab those 4 astronauts, board them into the CST Starliner capsule, wait until the orbiter is directly overhead, and then fire up those twin Super Draco engines on the bottom of this capsule. That is more than enough thrust to get us off the surface of the moon and on our way back into a nice low lunar orbit. So the crew didn't spend an awful long time on the surface of the moon, and the reason why this is because I didn't want to be performing any drastic inclination changes. Obviously, if we are going to be spending a duration of time on the surface, then the orbiter, it's going to be in a bit of a wonky inclination. So I wanted to go as soon as possible, but you can see what I'm doing here right now is actually plotting out a maneuver for not just my orbital insertion burn, but also to rendezvous with the orbiter. So what we're going to do is we are going to fire up those Super Dracos again, and this is something really bizarre that happens sometimes. So stock Delta V readout thinks I've only got, 80 meters per second left now, when actually if you look at the Kerbal Engineer Redux readout on the left of the altimeter, I've got 320. So when I performed that burn, the maneuver node on the right of the nav ball was saying that I didn't have enough Delta V. I did. I had more than enough. It's something really bizarre that happens, and I've seen people comment on it before. Not entirely sure why that does that, but oh well. Anyway, you can see we have now arrived at the orbiter, and unfortunately, because we do not have a docking port on top, well, we are going to have to get the 4 astronauts to go out on a little bit of a spacewalk, use their EVA jetpacks to transfer themselves between the 2 capsules. But with all 4 of them on board, we can come to the map screen and we can plot out our maneuver so that we can finally make it back to Earth. We have 845 meters per second of Delta V left in this, and fortunately, the trans-Earth injection is only going to cost us about 790. But now we're just going to warp around the moon until we hit our maneuver node and then fire up that advanced OTV engine, or hopefully the last time, bringing our perigee at Earth down to about 45 kilometers or thereabouts. I find that's a nice place to aim for if you don't want to skip off Earth's atmosphere and be flung straight back out into space, But at the same time, it's not too low that you're gonna burn your capsule up when you are re-entering into the atmosphere if you use the descent mode on the capsule, which provides a bit of a lifting surface so that you don't have quite an aggressive re-entry. It also manages to bring the G-forces down a little bit, so that way it's a bit more of a comfortable ride for our astronauts as they are making the final few minutes of their mission. And you can see the capsule did start to have a little bit of an overheat warning come up, but fortunately that vanished very, very shortly afterwards, and we didn't have that to worry about because it would have been a truly disastrous end to this mission if we had finally made it all the way out back to Earth and then the capsule decided that it was going to burn. But no, that was not going to be the case today. You can see the parachutes have now deployed and we are going to safely recover this crew of 4. In the last episode, I did ask people if they wanted me to show every single mission that went on with this series, and the general consensus was yes, but you don't have to do it in full detail that you do with every single mission, so that's exactly what we're doing now. I've just shown we have landed another radiator on the surface of the moon. It was a bit of a janky landing, and once again we had to use one of those Super Dracos on the side to right us before going and grabbing the lunar crane to try and attach this to the lunar South Pole outpost. So I did mention in the last episode as well, this thing is Kraken bait. The Kraken really does love this thing a lot. What I was trying to do here was dock this to the outpost. I tried this 5 times. It might have even been 6 times. This happened every single time. The entire base just got completely destroyed whenever I docked these together. And I thought maybe it's the width of the crane because those radiators do kind of clip into it a bit. So my thought is let's send down a wider crane at a later date. But I've had enough with these Kraken attacks at this moon base for now. Let's move on to something different. Now what we're going to be turning to is going to be our first steps into some serious interplanetary hardware. This is going to be the launch of our first ever nuclear tug on top of an Olympus rocket. It is using the same technology that I used to send 2 probes to Saturn and Jupiter, the NVGE atomic motor. However, this time we are launching it on top of an Olympus, so that means we are going to have an awful lot of liquid hydrogen ready for that nuclear thermal rocket to utilize. It's going to be awesome. We are going to be able to send a lot of stuff all over the solar system. That's right, this thing can send 200 tons to Mars and then safely, hopefully, if my calculations are correct, get back to Earth. So what we just witnessed there was going to be the fuel tank that goes on top. Except, for some reason, when launching this, the Raptor engines had a structural failure. Weird, because that's never ever happened before, and I've used the Olympus quite a lot in this series now. So I went into the vehicle assembly building, did a little bit of shifting around with the engines, and just made sure that everything was right, and then tried to relaunch this again. So yes, this is going to be another ginormous liquid hydrogen tank that we put on top of that original atomic stage, the original NTR stage. We are now going to deploy the payload fairings, and we can see that it is in fact a giant liquid hydrogen tank like I did just mention. Yes, except there are also some giant solar panels, circular solar panels on this as well, which will hopefully provide us more than adequate electric charge all the way out at Mars. And we are going to be attempting to land another one of these Olympus boosters. So my success rate with the Olympus boosters in this episode was not very high, partly due to the fact that I kept landing in the water when I was trying to do targeted landings, or because FMRS just flat out wasn't working yet again, which was a bit annoying. But you can see we have now rendezvoused with the original NTR stage with the new ginormous liquid hydrogen fuel tank. So I said we could send 200 tons to Mars and back. This is with this configuration. With just the NTR stage with its original hydrogen tank, that won't work. We need both of these in order to have enough delta V to actually perform that. Which, to be honest, it wasn't too bad, all things considered. Took 2 launches of an Olympus to get this all put together, but now that this has been put together, well, we can send an awful lot of stuff over to the Red Planet. And I'm not just going to be using one of these. No, I aim to have an entire fleet of these. So that is what we're going to be doing. We are going to be launching the second one once again from Norfolk on top of an Olympus. This is just going to be the NTR stage. And actually, I have an additional 3 of these being constructed right now. 1 from Norfolk, 1 from Tanegashima, and 1 from Kourou. And hopefully I will be able to have 5 of these all set up for my next Mars transfer window. And then, whilst I'm waiting for another transfer window, I'll just keep building them. I'll keep building them until I have probably around 10 to 20 of these that I can use. And then that way I can constantly be sending things over to Mars, over to Venus, maybe even send some things as far as Ceres, potentially even Jupiter. These are going to be a crucial part in my interplanetary plans for this series. And the great thing is, they are hopefully going to be fully reusable. As soon as I get them back to Earth, they have docking ports on them. I can refill them with liquid hydrogen, and then we can use them again for another mission, which is going to be absolutely fantastic because these are very efficient and we can send an awful lot of stuff all over the place. Mars stations, Mars bases, Venus stations, maybe even sending some stuff out to the asteroid belt, maybe even Jupiter. So those of you who may not have caught it, a couple of weeks ago, I did a live stream where I started designing this thing, which is going to be my first ever space station around Mars. And what I've decided to do now is, well, I've got those new nuclear tugs in orbit of Earth. And I thought, well, let's actually put that Mars space station where it should be. Let's start putting these modules all together, finish the design for the space station, and then send them up to those nuclear tugs and send them on their merry way over to Mars. So for the next about 8 minutes of this video, it's going to be very quick time lapses of me putting all of this station together, building the additional modules that I didn't finish whilst I was on the live stream, and then fitting them all into launch vehicles so that we can send them on their merry way up to those nuclear tugs in low Earth orbit. So originally what we were doing was just messing around with the observational module. Now what I'm going to be working on here is going to be basically a fuel tanker module. I've not entirely decided what fuel I'm going to use for the ascent and descent on Mars yet. I was originally toying with Methalox and using Raptors. However, it's just really heavy and it's not as efficient as Hydrolox, and Hydrolox is usually easier to produce because you only need water. But to be fair, with Mars, we can do the Sabatier process because we can take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that way we are going to be able to produce Methalox at Mars. It's so much denser and it's not as efficient as Hydrolox, and that's why originally these fuel tanks that I've gone with at the moment, they are going to be filled up with a ratio of Hydrolox that the CECE base uses, which is an RL10 variant that is deeply throttleable. It's a near future variant, so it is likely one that I will be using, and hopefully if I do get a polar outpost around Mars, well, that way I will be able to produce Hydrolox because of all of the water that is in the poles of Mars. But we'll see. I still might go for the Methalox route. I've not entirely decided yet, but what these are going to be is it's just ginormous silver balls on top of these 2 larger silver tanks in the middle with loads of docking ports all over the place so that when I send up refueling missions, well, we've got plenty of space to choose from. And then what I want to do is I want to have one of these on either side of the core module of the space station. We're going to grab the space station now and you can see, yep, I have placed them there. I originally went with 2 big silver ball-like tanks on the side, but I thought maybe 3 on each side would be a little bit better. So that's that. What we're going to be working on now is going to be our solar truss. Basically, this is going to be the way that we produce all kinds of our electric charge on the space station. And I've decided to go for solar. It is a space station, so we're not going to have any long nights to worry about. The orbit around Mars, it's not going to take us long, so we won't be on the dark side of Mars really that long at all. So solar, I feel like, is the best way to go. It's also not far enough away from the sun that we really have to worry that the solar panels are gonna really not get an awful lot of energy from the sun, especially if I am using these rather ginormous solar panels from Near Future Solar that I have decided to whack on the base of that. We're also going to whack a couple of radiators on here, some more docking ports, because you know you can never have enough docking ports on a space station. And then once that's done, we're going to grab that and see if there's a place where I want to fit this on the space station. And I thought right at the bottom looked quite nice. So one thing about all of these space station modules is they're all going to have their own dedicated avionics unit. That way, when I'm trying to dock them to the nuclear tug before we send them off to Mars, well, it's just easier to control them. And if they've all got their own avionics and they can all control themselves, then I should never really have to worry about avionics for the space station, which is going to be very nice. So this module that I'm working on right now is going to be a dedicated docking module. That way, whenever we have craft that come along to either crew the station or refuel the station or just add anything to the station really, we've got somewhere where we can actually dock. At least I'd like to think so. One of the docking ports that I have used for this at the bottom, it's an extendable docking tube. From what I gather, it's a little bit like the claw from stock, where it will grab hold of anything that's close by to it. I've never actually used it, so it's a little bit risky, which is why I also have the NASA docking ports on here as well. But I think it'll be very interesting to see just how those docking ports do work. This module that I have been working on whilst talking about that is essentially the same as the last docking module. It's just slightly extended, and then that way we get a little bit of asymmetry to the station. And you know, asymmetry sometimes looks quite nice. But that is essentially the main modules of this space station now all designed. I have left room for additional modules if I so choose, but we're already at almost 400 parts. And I feel like if I add anything more, it's just going to be absolutely lagtastic. So I feel like this might be enough for now, considering it doesn't even have any crew module. Well, it has crew modules. It doesn't have any capsules attached to it that we are going to be sending crew over in, which of course is going to up the part count even more. So with that being done, what I need to do is figure out how I'm actually going to launch all of these individual modules and get them up to the nuclear tugs. And it's relatively easy, to be honest. We're just going to launch everything on top of an Olympus and whack these orbital maneuvering stages on them, try and find out ways that I can place them where it's going to look good, and it's also not going to interfere with anything to do with the space station. So that is the observatory all done, and I want to talk about the name for this at the moment. So I've called it Ellis Station. Ellis Station after Bonnie Ellis from Kerbal Gets Real. She was one of the astronauts that died in that series, and in the last series we did have the Ellen Cox Station around the moon. And I thought, well, she was another one of those on that mission, so maybe the station around Mars should be named after her as well. And I thought that's kind of my line of thinking. And then there was one other astronaut, James Peters, who also died on that mission. It was a very tragic mission, lots of death. No death in this series so far, but yes, it was a very bad mission. So I'm thinking maybe at some point a surface base on Mars or something should be named after him. It's something that I've been toying with because I kind of feel like I wanted to bring those names from that series back into this. But let me know what you think. If you like the name, if you don't like the name, if you hate it, if you want me to change it, let me know in a comment down below and we'll see what the general consensus is. And hopefully I don't have to change the name because that would be very, very terrible because I've already designed a mission patch for it. Anyway, this solar truss, that was the last module that I wanted to send up to space. And I wanted to send this from Kourou, from the ESA launch site that I am jointly sharing with NHSA. And it weighs about 50 tons to get it up to orbit. The ESA does not have a launch vehicle capable of lifting 50 tons in this universe at the moment. So what we're going to do is build something new. And actually, this hasn't got a name yet either. My names have been pretty terrible for this episode. But essentially what it is, 2 Vulcane engines in a core stage with 2 RSRMVs strapped strapped onto the side to provide all of that thrust that we are going to need to get this off of the launch pad. Now, one thing that I really liked about the RSRMVs for this is they have an ESA variant, which, as you can see, plasters a load of European flags on it. So I feel like this is hard to miss that this is a European Space Agency rocket. Uses the Vulcane from the Ariane 5, and yeah, there's just flags galore all over this thing. And yeah, this can actually take 75 tons to low Earth orbit, so it outperforms its specification. Now, finally, for this episode, we've designed a load of Mars stuff. Don't you think that we wouldn't be launching at least one of them? So we are going to be launching the observational module for the Mars space station, and we are going to attempt to dock it to one of the nuclear tugs that we have in low Earth orbit already. Once again, this has been launched on top of an Olympus. We did just see this being made completely in the vehicle assembly building, so I don't really know if there's an awful lot that I need to say about this other than, yeah, there we go. The payload fairings have deployed, and we can see the cupola module up the top. We've got 2 rings on this thing, and we also have a couple of orbital maneuvering engines that we are going to be utilizing in order to get this to rendezvous with that nuclear tug in low Earth orbit. So I've got this all built up now. However, we're still about 400 days away from my Mars transfer window, so it's going to be a while before we send these over to Mars. It's over 400 days because my series transfer window is the one that's up next, so it's going to be a while. That will probably come in the next episode that I do, depending on whether I do more lunar stuff or whether I just kind of focus on Mars. As another thing, let me know in the comments, what do you want to see happen next in this series? Do you want to see all of this Mars space station being built, or should I carry on with making the moon kind of more habitable than it is already? I do still need to send down a permanent crew to the Lunar South Pole outpost, so that is something that I will be doing, but I would like to know your feedback. Do you want to see Mars, or do you want to see more stuff around the moon for now? But anyway, we have rendezvoused with the nuclear tug. Now we're just going to attempt a docking, and that will be the end of this episode. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, why not give it a like? If you really enjoyed it and want to keep up with the content on my channel, please do consider subscribing. I'd like to give a big thanks for the continued support from all of my patrons, and I have been Karnasa, and I will see you later.